First of all, thank you so much for being here. Today, we're going to dive into talking a bit about parenting in the digital age and creating a flexible media plan for you and your family. We'll start with a quick introduction. I'll tell you a bit about myself and my background, and then jump into why this matters. Then, I'll offer a few frameworks for rethinking screen time. We'll then talk about what's developmentally appropriate by age. Lastly, we'll talk about the components of a successful summer tech plan, and I will give you a template that you can fill out as we go, or you can print out later and fill out with your family. I'll leave some time at the end for questions as well. Okay. So let's start with who I am and why this matters. My name is Dr. Rupa, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty here showing that picture. One second. There we go. Okay, sorry. My name is Dr. Rupa Robbins. I'm a licensed psychologist who specializes in kids and teenagers. I have a private practice in Los Gatos, California called Spark Psychology, where I specialize in neuropsychological assessment, therapy, and parent consultation. But of course, most importantly, I'm a mom of two girls, ages 5 and almost 3. Although I've spent the greater part of my life now studying psychology, human development, and education, these two little girls right here make me question everything I know about kids daily. They definitely keep me on my toes. About 5 years ago, I started to notice that almost every single conversation that I was having with parents in my clinical practice would turn into a conversation about screen time. What was appropriate? How could they prevent tantrums? What did they need to be teaching their kids about being online? So I started researching, studying, and learning as much as I could about the topic, and tech positive parenting was born as a result. In thinking about why this workshop matters, the reality of the situation is that our kids spend a lot of time on screens. This graph is from Common Sense Media, and it shows that our tweens, which is the graph in light green on the left, spend on average 5.5 hours on screens outside of school. And our teens are spending about 8.5 hours on screens outside of school. The alarming part here is that this is outside of the school day. It is recreational screen time. This is their downtime, the time that they are not doing academic work. In the summer, when there's no school and there's more downtime, these numbers are likely on the higher end. If you have younger kids like me, this graph may resonate a bit more. So Common Sense Media just released these stats this year. This is average daily screen use by age in hours and minutes for kids under 8. So you'll see that between those ages of 5 and 8, we're starting to climb, right? And kids are spending almost 3.5 hours on their devices outside of school. Now, if this data reflects your family, I hope that this makes you feel less alone. I'm not showing these numbers to induce any sort of guilt, but more to provide the rationale for that why this is important. Screens are a huge part of our kids' lives, and so it's really important that as parents, we learn to manage them and to help our kids build self-regulation skills and self-awareness skills. And if this data doesn't reflect your family, I hope that it gives you a little bit of insight into what's going on for the kids in your community and kids in our country in general. So let's think a little bit about how we can think about the screen time that our kids are getting. There's a lot of noise out there, especially recently, a lot of anxiety inducing content that makes us as parents feel like screen time is going to ruin our kids. Personally, I don't believe in taking this sort of black and white approach. I think there's a lot more nuance, and it's worth thinking about things a little more deeply and in a more kind of complex manner. So, I'm going to offer some frameworks that are grounded in research to help you think about what your kids are doing online. The first one is that not all screen time is created equally. The quality of what your kids are doing online matters more than the quantity of time that they're spending online. In so many conversations, parents will ask me, well, my kid is 5 or my kid is 12. How many hours a day should my child be spending online? Or what's the appropriate amount of screen time for a child of this age? And I never answer that question with a black and white number because it depends on your child. It depends on their individual personality, their interests, and most importantly, it depends on what they're doing online. So, first of all, we're going to talk about the difference between active and passive screen time. Active screen time is screen time that is spent doing something active or creative. So, this could be drawing, it could be creating digital art, it could be learning a dance or cooking a recipe from something that you saw online. A lot of kids, especially here in the Bay Area, are learning how to code and are creating their own websites, their own games. This is all active screen time. Passive screen time is just like it sounds, more along the lines of watching television, watching social media videos, and then something that we call social media vigilance, which for older kids really means, and for adults, really means just scrolling through social media and not actively posting, not commenting, not interacting with others, but instead just taking that passive approach and watching what's going on. There's evidence in the research that shows that active screen time can be more beneficial for children than passive screen time. And often, the more harmful thing for mental health is engaging in too much passive screen time. So, that said, passive screen time can be really beneficial for relaxation. So, it's all about balance and it's all about really thinking about the nuance of what your child is doing and when. The second framework here is these three key questions around replacement, facilitation, and connection. So first, this is one of my favorite questions to think about with families. This question is, what is screen time replacing? So here, I want you to think about the things that you definitely want your kids to do every single day. For me, this includes sleeping enough, getting outside to play for multiple hours a day, having meaningful social experiences, connecting with family, and engaging in imaginary and independent play. If you have a teenager, the non negotiables may be a little bit different, right? So you might not want them to be engaging in imaginary play as much, but you probably want them to be eating healthy meals, exercising, having enough time for their schoolwork, and having enough time to socialize in person. The key here is that we want to make sure that screen time is not replacing any of our non negotiables. If your kids have gotten these things, these non negotiables, into their day, or you have a plan to get them into their day later, then it may be a good time for the screen, or it's something that you don't have to think too much about. The second question is, what is screen time facilitating? So, this may be more aimed at parents of younger children, but sometimes screen time facilitates something that's really important for the family system, like mom or dad getting a much needed break to sit down for a few minutes, or to exercise, or to work. And if screen time is facilitating something that improves the mental, physical, or emotional health of a parent or somebody else in the family, that usually is more impactful for the kids in the family than spending 30 or 60 minutes watching something or doing something on their screen. Lastly, the third question is screen time, or is their time on technology, helping my child to connect either to themselves, to others, or to new ideas? So, one of the things that I see often in my clinical practice is that sometimes kids have deep passions that cannot be necessarily offered in their physical community. So, it might be that a child who lives somewhere rural is really into a certain game or loves to knit or has some sort of passion for which there aren't people in their community that they can connect with and do that passion or engage in that passion. And so being online really offers an opportunity to connect with people all over the world and to connect with knowledge in a way that when we were growing up, we didn't necessarily have. And so it's really thinking about how the time spent online is helping your child to connect and what they're connecting to. If there are specific ideas or groups that are important to them, then it might be a better use of time than, say, passively watching a TV show. Um, Great. And as I go along, if you have any questions, please do feel free to pop those into the chat. All right, so section 3, what is developmentally appropriate? Okay, so we're going to go kind of by age and stage and talk a little bit about what screen time looks like for each of these stages. So for our very young children, ages 0 to 5, we know that kids of this age thrive with routines and when they know what to expect. Predictability and consistency are really the name of the game here. So we want to offer screen time at the same time each day if we can. And or quite importantly, we don't want to use it as a reward because we don't want to put it on a pedestal for our kids at this age. Instead, if it's just part of their day and something that they have access to, just like they have access to certain toys or outdoor time or their friends at certain times of day, we really want to keep it at the same level as those other activities. We want you to be co-viewing as much as you can. And what that means is that if your child is watching a show or is using an app on an iPad, we want you to be there facilitating to the extent that you can. Now, if you can't, then ask some questions about what they watched or did later and help them generalize what they did. So, a lot of times, kids of this age can't tell the difference between reality and what they're seeing offline. And so, we want to help them with that distinction. So, we might ask questions that connect what they're seeing on TV or on an app to what they're seeing or what they experience in real life. And that helps them to really solidify the difference between this is what happens on Daniel Tiger on the TV, and this is how that connects to my real life. So even if you're using this time to facilitate personal time to, take a break or exercise or cook a meal, you can generally ask some questions just from knowing the title of the episode they watched that will help them to facilitate those connections between what they watched and their real life. Now, elementary school age kids, so those kids between ages 5 and 10, they still thrive with clear boundaries, with structure, and with routines. At this age, we want to fill their days with as much offline entertainment as we can and offer technology second. However, it's important to understand that technology can still really help them develop interests and pursue passions. One thing that you'll see across the board here for all ages is that modeling really matters. As great as it would be if we could make rules for our kids and kind of do the opposite or not have to follow those rules, they're always watching and they're noticing, and most importantly, they're learning from what we are doing. And so, if we want them to be exhibiting a certain behavior or have a certain relationship with technology, it's important for us to also think about our own relationships with technology and our own behaviors because our kids learn most from what they see us doing. As your kids get older, you're really focusing more on approaching your kids with curiosity and using a collaborative approach. We want to help them to start self monitoring and notice how different aspects of technology make them feel. And we want to help facilitate that social connection safely. This looks different for every child, but the key here is to know your child and, if possible, to not give in to the my friends have this technology, so I need it too narrative. Every child is is different, and every child is going to be ready for different technologies at different stages. And so, what we want to be thinking about is how we can take our child's individual needs and individual differences and tailor the technology that they're using to, to their developmental stage. Um, as your kids get older into high school, I really want you to be thinking about what skills you want them to have as they get ready to leave the home. So we're working on building those competencies of self-awareness, of self-monitoring, of self-regulation, while maintaining those regular conversations and check-ins. There's a lot of research that suggests that for these older ages, so basically for teenagers, the kind of heavy handed approach is much less effective than collaborative conversations, approaching with curiosity, checking in about what your kids' friends are doing, and kind of giving them the onus to teach you about what they're doing online, and then kind of guiding them with questions and with that collaborative approach to understand whether their actions are safe, whether their actions are kind and compassionate, and whether that's really how they want to be spending their time. And so that's creating our flexible media plan will help with some of those conversations. But that is research really suggests that that collaborative approach, the approach with curiosity, is more effective than kind of rigid rules. I got the question, where can I find appropriate technology apps or channels for my child? And this is a resource that I'll share at the end, but you may have heard about Common Sense Media. And Common Sense Media has grades for different apps, for different TV shows. And it's a really good place to start in terms of figuring out if something is appropriate for your child's age and what sort of content they might see, what they might be exposed to. My other recommendation for this is to always either watch the first episode with your child or do a little preview of a game if you're going to offer your child access to that, so that you can have some information about what your kids are accessing and what they might be exposed to um, with that technology. All right. So, we're going to jump into creating our flexible summer media plan. And when we think about why we should make a plan, uh, there are several reasons. So my guess is that if you're here or if you're watching this workshop later, you already kind of know the answer to this. So first of all, it is much better in this space to be proactive instead of reactive. My firm belief here is that kids do well if and when they can. If we're proactive and we approach these conversations from a calm, curious, collaborative place, my hunch is that your family is going to have a much better time managing tech this summer. This will prevent battles and it will give you something to refer to and something substantive to use when you're having these conversations. And you're less likely to have to fall back on the because I said so, or because that's just the way it is. And you can fall back on, well, we created this media plan and this is kind of what we decided. If you want to change it, let's have a conversation about that. We will also create a plan that aligns with your family values and thinks about the goals that you have for your family this summer, the things that you really want to be doing this summer that are offline and online. And lastly, it gives kids predictability and ownership. So part of this media plan is going to include your children in creating the plan. And when we include kids in creating a plan, they are much more likely to abide by that plan and to be open to having conversations and reflections around that plan. So we want to make sure that they are included, they have some ownership, and they know what to expect. So, all right. So I'm going to drop the plan into the chat so that So this is a PowerPoint file, and the reason for that is so that you can edit it as you're watching this online. I'm also going to drop in a Google Drive file, and that is a PDF. And so you can just download that and print that, or just take a look at it if you're watching from your phone. So if you're using the PowerPoint file, make sure to open it in either PowerPoint or Keynote. And if not, you can open the Google Drive file just by clicking the link. Okay, so there are multiple different components to this plan. The first question that you'll see at the top is, what are our offline summer goals? And we're going to go step by step, and I'm going to walk you through how I would fill this out and the different things that I want to be thinking about when I'm filling this out. So the first question is, what are our offline summer goals? The second is around daily routines. So when are screens okay? The third is about screen-free zones or times. The fourth is about what content or apps are approved and what's not approved. The next is about alternatives to screen time and what your kids can do when they are bored, which is definitely a question I'm sure that you will get this summer. And lastly, when we will check in about how it's going. So we're going to have a regular time to check in about how media use or tech use is going. So let's fill it out together. Okay, so the first part, what are our offline summer goals? So we're really thinking about what you and your family want to do this summer, new skills that you want to learn, maybe adventures that you want to go on. I want you to kind of brainstorm with your family when you're completing this. Asking these questions explicitly helps your kids have an opportunity to be intentional and to have ownership over the family plan. If you have really young kids like me, this may be more of a conversation that you have with your partner or with anybody else who's kind of on your parenting team. Otherwise, this is a really good way to frame the summer and to get your kids involved in the conversation around what you're going to do to kind of brainstorm ideas for those days where you have a little extra time, where you are willing to take them on an adventure, or just new skills or new things that they want to be learning at home. So things that I put on here would be, having new experiences. So maybe that's things like trying a new restaurant or going to a new water park or a new park. It could be something really small. It could be something really big. In my family, we're doing lots of travel this summer, but hopefully we'll do some day trips, but lots of overnight trips. Also, activities at home like reading, like time spent outdoors, and then spending time with friends, spending time with family, and exploring new skills through different camps that my kids might be enrolled in. And so these are the types of things that I might put in this top box. Again, if you have kids that I would say are above 6, this is something that you want to be doing, even 5, you want to be doing with your children and thinking about brainstorming with them so they have ownership. All right, so let's move on. The next part is about daily routines or when screens are okay. And the reason that this is framed like this is because I think it's really important to be explicit about okaying and using that positive framework for, this is a great time for you to use your iPad, or this is a great time for you to relax and watch a show. So having that positive framework really takes technology and takes the screen time off of its pedestal and makes it more of a part of the routine and will reduce the battles to some extent. So there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. One is by thinking about routines in your day. So it could be, when we get home from camp or when I'm making dinner. Those are great times for you to be using technology. It could be an actual time range, right? Like 4 to 6 p.m. It could be after a certain activity, or it could be after they complete some sort of responsibility that they have. So first you finish your chores for the day, and whenever you're done with your chores, that's a great time for you to have some downtime and to use your screen. So we're really starting with the framework of when is this okay, as opposed to when are we not using screens. But that's the second part here. So screen-free zones or times. Screen-free zones are one of my favorite ways to hold an entire family accountable, which is how we really start to see shifts in family culture. So the thing is here is that this applies to you too. Our brains are processing so much information at any given moment that when we can make things easier by creating either environments, so that's like a place in your house or a time of day or a time of the week that is entirely screen free, that becomes second nature and soon it becomes habit. And when our brains don't have to think about it, we just know that this is a screen free time. So I'm going to put my phone in this place. We're going to plug our iPads in. We don't watch TV during this time. Um, it will be a little bit painful at first, and then everybody will get into the habit of it, and it becomes part of your family routine and your family culture. So, in my family, screen free zones are the dinner table and my kids' bedroom. So, when we're doing their bedtime routines, there are no phones at that time. And then when we're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the table, there are no phones at that time. And we have places to put the phones near each of those places so that we can kind of just drop them in and move on, right? Other families that I've worked with have entire days of the week, whether it's Sunday or whether it's during a family hike or church or whatever it is that your family does routinely. They make those portions of their week screen free. Remember, this is a really powerful tool, but it's only powerful if the whole family engages. So when you're thinking about this, make sure that it's something that you can hold your part of the deal, right? So if you know that you need to take work calls in the car on the way to when you're driving your kids to camp, then the car is not a good screen free zone for you. Make this realistic. It doesn't have to be huge. Start small, and then you can always add a second or third screen free zone. All right. Next, we're going to think about approved content and apps. So this section is where it's important to be explicit about our expectations around what your kid can be doing and what they can't be doing. When you write it down, it's easy to go back to it and refer to it and stay calm in the moment if you find that your child has gotten onto an app that they were not supposed to get onto, if they're playing a game that they're not supposed to be playing. And you'll see here that when I put in, Minecraft, I put single player only. So I'm being as explicit as I possibly can so that there are no questions. The thing is that it's hard to know what our kids are doing online, right? And it's hard to know what they're accessing. If you have layers of protection that you're using, such as you have Apple Family or you have Bark or something along those lines where you have to approve when new technology is being bought or is being accessed, that makes this a little bit easier. For our younger kids where you might not have those things in place yet, we want to just be thinking about what you know about what your kids are accessing, and the easiest way to maybe to keep them from being tempted is to remove the things that you don't want them to be using on from their iPads or from the devices that they're using. And the other thing that I have here is that new apps, games, or shows need to be approved by a parent. And so, if you have that in writing, it's easier to go back to it and to make sure that your kids understand that this is a collaborative process. And when there's new technology that they're using, it needs to be approved by you. Next, we have alternatives to screen time. So, your kids at some point this summer are going to come up to you and say, Mom or Dad, I'm so bored. What do I do? Well, if you brainstorm some activities that you can do proactively and you put them on this list, you can point to the list and say, Go look at what we brainstormed earlier. We know the research shows over and over and over and over that boredom is really good for our kids and for their brains. It gives their brains a reason, an opportunity to rest, and it gives them the opportunity to get creative. It is where creativity is born. It is how our kids learn to entertain themselves. It is how they develop that independence, and it's also how their attention spans grow. And so we want them to have the time where they don't have access to technology and they are in charge of entertaining themselves, whether that's, at certain times of day, which will naturally happen if you use this plan when you use the daily routine section and the screen-free zone section, or if it's on, certain vacations where they're away from the things that they are used to. So remember that when they say I'm bored, it's actually a really good thing and it's an opportunity for them. I also got the question, what if my children are already in the routine of using too much tech and are resistant to reducing time using a plan? And that's a huge one, something that I will also touch on in a little bit. But if this is the case, when you go through an exercise like this, I think you might be a little bit surprised by how self aware our kids are about the technology that they're using, and how, when you come at this with a collaborative, curious approach, they may be more willing to reduce their screen time and to kind of take a little bit of a different approach. And the thing about this, what you'll notice here is that we are not saying you're reducing your screen time from 8 hours to 4, and this is how we're going to do it. Instead, we're saying here's when we're going to okay screen time. It's not a certain number of hours. Here's where the whole family is not going to use devices. And here are all the other things that we're going to fill our days with. And when you take this approach and you are kind of showing how screens and technology fit into all of these other parts of your life, it is less likely that they're going to be so resistant than if you come kind of at them saying, you used 8 hours of screen time last week. We need to get that down to 6. We can't use this much screen time. This is, ruining your brain. Whatever it is, the way that we kind of naturally may want to talk to our kids about devices. The reason for putting together this plan is so that we use a more collaborative approach. I have found in my practice over and over that kids are super self reflective. They're super aware of how much screen time their parents are using and how much time their parents are spending on their devices. And there is some level of relief when the whole family kind of approaches this as a family and as a problem that they're all going to tackle together. The last section of this media plan is about check-ins. So it says, when will we check in about how this is going? And this is a really, really important part of this plan, because we don't want to just set the plan up and then leave it somewhere. We're trying to build self-awareness and self-regulation habits in our kids, because those are the things that we want them to leave with, right? When they are, fully cooked, when they leave our houses, we want them to have the self-awareness of how much technology they're using, how it's impacting their well-being, their emotional health, their mental health, their physical health, and how to regulate. And the way that we do that is by supporting them in checking in and building that self-awareness as they are growing up. So a few notes about checking in. This might be something that you want to do weekly, maybe bi-weekly. I wouldn't go too much longer than every 2 weeks, because you want it to kind of be top of mind. And for a whole summer, that's checking in like 6 times, right? At most. So a few notes about checking in. So one of the most important things here is that you need to check in about yourself too, right? So we're modeling. We're checking in about our own tech use. We're modeling mistakes that we might have made. Like, I know that at dinner we're not supposed to have our devices, and last night I got a really important work call and I took it during dinner, and I realized that I just, I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry, and I'm going to really work on that. When we model that we make mistakes, that we're working on our own self-regulation, that we know that we're not perfect, it really evens the playing field and helps our kids to be more open and more self-aware themselves. And it changes that conversation from me versus you to us versus the problem, which is really important in this. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to talk to our kids about this tech plan, how to have this conversation, and some things that might come up. So when you're putting together this plan, there are a few principles that I think it's important to abide by. The first, and I've alluded to this many times, is to use curiosity and not control. So we're not going to say, went to this workshop and I put together this plan and this is the plan. This is what we're doing. There's no negotiating about this. This is how we're going to use technology this summer. That is not what we're doing, right? Instead, we're getting really curious about what they want for themselves, about how they use technology, how they feel it's valuable or it is entertaining, or what they love about technology, and also what they don't love about technology, because I think they'll surprise you in what they share. So use curiosity, get curious about what brings them joy, what they want for themselves, and kind of if there are skills or things that they want to develop this summer. Remember, you're on the same team. So, as I said, it is not you versus your children, it is you and your children developing a plan to use technology effectively. You are all working together and developing skills that, if you're anything like me, I am definitely still working on and will continue to work on for the rest of my life. And so we want to model that we're all kind of these works in progress and we are all working on these skills, maybe we're at different places in our development, but we're all a work in progress. It's also important to ask them questions and to give them the ability to be the expert on themselves. So, what do you enjoy most online? Don't assume that you know the answers to these questions because, again, they might surprise you. And they might be doing something with a friend or doing something that you're not quite aware of that will come out in questions, or sorry, in conversations that are framed this way, right? Um, and then how does it make you feel after? So for me, I often get caught in a loop of scrolling. And then once I kind of come to, and I think, goodness, I just spent, 5, 10, 15 minutes looking at these videos. That makes me feel like I just wasted my time, or it makes me feel not great. Or sometimes I'm like, that was the funniest video I've seen in a long time. I'm really glad I spent my time doing that. And it really just depends on what I was doing, what I should have been doing in the moment, or if I was kind of just giving myself the downtime to do that. And so we really want to be reflective about how it makes you feel afterwards, and how that technology is impacting, again, that emotional, mental, physical health, what it's replacing. When you ask these questions, it helps your children to build that narrative inside their mind where they're going to start asking themselves those questions. Oh, I just watched 3 episodes of, whatever it is they're watching on Netflix. Like, actually, I played soccer for 4 hours this morning at soccer camp, and I really valued that downtime. That was really good for me. Or I haven't done much of anything today, and I feel kind of, lazy after doing that. So when we start to ask these questions, it again starts to build that narrative. Lastly, remember that we are honoring intention over perfection. We are not trying to be perfect. None of us is perfect in these ways, is amazing at, self-control, because the technology is built to hold our attention, and it's really good at holding our attention. And so when we have intent and when we are intentional about trying to, use technology at certain times but be screen free at other times, that's the most important thing, is that we're trying, and as I said, we are works in progress. Okay, so a few sample scripts by age, and then we'll wrap up. So if I were going through this media plan and I worked on certain parts of it with my kids. So I also just want to kind of revisit for a second and say that most of it should be done collaboratively with your children, right? If your children are very young, it might be more of a conversation with your partner, like I said. But the best way to do this media plan would be to print out one, or fill in online one for each child, because that apps and content section is going to be individual for each child. And each child might have different offline goals for the summer, and each child is going to have a different list of what to do when they're bored. The parts that are more family, will be the same or consistent across your whole family would be the screen-free zones and the when we check in at the bottom. So I would do this activity together, but have a plan for each child. And if you want to have one for yourself, that's a great way to model too. Okay, so with our little ones, we're starting to build self regulation and autonomy, and we want them to know the signs for when screen time will be done. So you'll see in this script that I don't use time. Instead, I use visual cues that will help them to understand when screen time is over. So, this summer, our screen time routine is going to change a bit. You'll be able to watch a show after lunch each day and play on the iPad for 20 minutes when I make dinner in the evenings. You'll know that one show is done when you see the words at the end. You'll know it's time to put the iPad away when you hear the timer go off. What show would you like to watch tomorrow? So, also, with our little kids, when you end with a question that is giving them autonomy, they are much more likely to be on board with whatever changes you're making. And here, you're likely not changing as much for kids in this age range, right? Because they might not be at school yet, things might be a little bit different, but not as much as summer versus school year is for our older kids. But you're thinking about time of day, routine, consistency, and predictability. For the middle age group, we really want to honor their voices. And so a lot of times our kids know what they need, and so we're going to invite them to help us build this plan. So summer is finally here. I wanted to check in with you about a few things. First, what are some things that you really want to do this summer? Those are great ideas. Here are some things that I want to add. I've also been thinking a bit about screen time this summer. We're going to have some guidelines that might be different than what we've done in the past. Here's what I've thought about so far. I was hoping you could help me with some of these other areas. And so, again, you're inviting them to help you. You are inviting them to contribute. We are honoring their voices. And lastly, for the older kids, as I said, research consistently shows that conversations and curiosity work so much better than that enforcer attitude. So, again, approach with curiosity so that they think they might be able to sell, or so that they learn. Approach with curiosity so that they can show their expertise and they can show what they're passionate about. They feel welcome to share things with you. And talk about using the self-regulation features that are inherent to their phones or the technology that they're using. So Apple Screen Time, there are different apps that I'm happy to share with you. You can shoot me an email and I would be happy to share a list of apps that help with building self-regulation for kids. And again, as I'll say over and over, modeling is the best tool and the most difficult tool that we have in our toolbox. Even for these older kids, for our tweens and our teens, they're still watching and they're still learning from what we are doing. All right, so I got one more question that says, let's see, how do I manage power struggles with my kids when it's time to transition off screens, but they're saying one more episode or one more level of my game? Okay, so it kind of depends on the age range, but one really important thing to think about here is preparing them in advance, right? So whether you're using a visual timer, whether you're using, if they're watching episodes of something, you're using the number of episodes or the words at the end, as long as you've prepared them, then I think you hold the boundary, you validate the feeling, right? So it's okay for them to be mad, but we're done with screen time today, and screen time will be offered again tomorrow. So the thing with doing this plan or using this structure is that we have something to fall back on that we've talked about in the calm moments. And we as a family are working towards this. And so you have laid the foundation to set the boundary. And so you set the boundary and then you help them work through their feelings. All right. I hope that answered that question. And if not, let me know and I can go more into detail. All right. So, a few key takeaways. First of all, as I said, don't aim for perfection. Nobody's perfect in any of this, right? That's why we're here. And the goal is to create a framework that is adaptable, that is collaborative, and that honors your child's developmental age. The goal is connection, intention, and building those self-awareness and self-regulation skills in our kids. All right. So, In terms of staying connected, if you found the information that I presented here today useful, I would love to stay connected with you. There are a few ways that we can do that. So you can subscribe to my Substack or follow me on Instagram at Tech Positive Parenting. I always am kind of posting little tidbits there. I love speaking to communities. I love speaking to schools. I love speaking at workplaces. So if there's somewhere where you feel that information like this would be helpful, or it would be nice to start this conversation with other people, please email me and I would love to touch base with you about how to do that. And I will be putting out a course later this year called So You're Ready for a Phone. And the difference between this course and other courses is that it is a parent-child course. So when your child is ready for that next step in getting their own technology, this is a course that you and your child would take together in order to have the conversations, to be collaborative in that space, and to be able to kind of the create the that line of communication and collaboration. And so if you would like to join the interest list, I am putting into the chat right now um, the links for all of these things. Maybe. Hold on. Oh, there we go. All right. And a few other resources that I'm happy to share with you. So, like I said, Common Sense Media is a great resource just to check on developmental readiness and to check on kind of what kind of content is going to be in apps, is going to be in games that you're offering to your kids. Tech Talk Tuesday from Screenagers is a blog that provides a question for you to talk with your kids about each Tuesday. And as you may have picked up on, one of my big tenets is in communication and consistent conversation. And I think that's the best way to build these self awareness and self regulation skills in our teenagers. So, this is a great resource to do that. And then the Gamer Educator, if you have kids who are gaming, they are a must follow, and they are putting out a book later this year too. They have a lot of information on the kind of the nitty gritty of each game, a video game, and kind of how to keep your kids safe on those video games. And I think that that's really important, and that's an area of expertise that I don't have. I have appreciated this time with you so much, and I'm wishing you a very joyful, intentional, connected summer. Take care, and thank you so much for joining. And I'll hang back for just a minute or two to answer any other questions that anybody may have. Thank you so much.